Good afternoon. Hi, thanks for coming. Fantastic turnout, wonderful to see so many faculty come and hear the second annual presidential address to the faculty. Organized by the Faculty Senate, I'm Joshua Nelson. Current chair of the Faculty Senate, I'm chair of the Department of Film and Media Studies and associate professor in English. Are we good on streaming and all that kind of fun stuff? That's a thumbs up, I think. That's a thumbs up. Groovy. Thank you so much to the good folks here at Music for hosting us and volunteering their space. Thank you to past Faculty Senate Chair Sarah Ellis for helping to arrange that. Special thanks to immediate past Faculty Senate Chair Megan Elwood Madden for basically reminding us that shared governance is something that requires all of our attention and a great deal of effort. So thanks to the Faculty Senate Executive Committee for all of that effort in helping to put this together. I'd also like to introduce Amy Bradshaw, Chair-elect of the Faculty Senate, Associate Professor in the Department of Educational Psychology in the smaller field of Instructional Psychology and Technology. She has been here since 1998, so she's seen a few things. Yeah, that was a knowing nod if ever I've seen one. Let me say a little bit about the format today. So I will introduce Interim President of the University of Oklahoma, Joseph Harroz, Jr., and then he'll offer up some brief comments on the general state of the university. And then Amy and I will tag team. We're going to put him right in the middle where he can't get away and submit to him questions submitted to us by the faculty. So we have gone through those and tried to combine them thematically as well as we are able. And then, if time allows, we will look for questions at the end. We are scheduled to be here for 1.5 hours. So depending on how long-winded your new president is, we may or may not get to hear from you individually in the audience. Don't get your hopes up. Seen him talk. Sorry, I'm gonna lose my job in 5 minutes straight. So it is really our distinct pleasure to introduce to you Joseph Harroz, Jr. Sorry. You know, you give a faculty member a mic and they just lose all control. He became interim president of the University of Oklahoma on May 17, 2019. For the past 9 years, he has served as dean and professor of law at the OU College of Law. Harroz graduated Phi Beta Kappa with distinction from the University of Oklahoma in 1989, where he majored in economics and minored in zoology. He received his Juris Doctor in 1992 from Georgetown University Law Center and began his legal career as a legislative director and legal counsel in the United States Senate, and then practiced law with the firm of Crowe and Dunlevy in Oklahoma City. Harroz began working at OU in 1994, serving as the vice president for executive affairs. In 1996, he began his service as general counsel to the OU Board of Regents and served in that role for 12 years, the longest term for anyone in that role. In 2008, he became the president of a publicly traded healthcare company, growing its market capitalization to more than $80 million, before returning to OU in 2010 as the dean and director of the OU Law Center. And Fenelon Bosch? Was that close?
I don't think he's here.
Okay. It was weird that it got that much louder when I said the name, though. As the Fenelon Bosch Chair of Law. In addition, Harroz has taught for more than 22 years, including courses in employment, sports, and healthcare law. Under his leadership, the College of Law has achieved record national recognition, including the highest U.S. News and World Report ranking by any Oklahoma law school in history, and the first law school in the nation to achieve Apple Distinguished School status by Apple Incorporated. In addition, his fundraising efforts have more than doubled the overall endowment of the college and more than tripled the scholarship endowment. With that, we'll turn it over to Interim President Joseph Harroz. Please welcome him.
To be clear, though, when we met a couple of days ago, Joshua said, I don't think 10 minutes is enough, it should be 30. So when this goes sideways, you can blame one person for that. It's not me. I also want you to know that Dean Kathleen Guzman is here from the College of Law. And I understand she had a faculty meeting with the entire faculty today, something I did for the previous 9 years, and that she began it by indicating that she, unlike her predecessor, wouldn't bore them with a lot of slides. I learned about that, and I've learned from that, and I have no slides for you today. And for those that sat where I would have sat back in the corners on the aisle, the hour and 30 minutes could be flexible. We're going to try and work through that. I love the recognition, yes. So in the office earlier today, last night, thinking about this presentation, in my mind's eye, felt like a presentation. And I had a big audience set of comments to deliver. And when I walked in here and was here about 15 minutes early, I realized I know most of you all, or have worked with you, or around you most of the time. And so I don't think the big, broad pronouncements are what is sort of due here. Let me just walk through the conversation that I've had. I've now spoken with the Faculty Senate exec 4 times, each one scheduled for an hour, each one going longer, largely because of Joshua. But those have really been productive conversations. The first day the first day I was in this job, and by the way, the first day I had the job, I received a phone call at 12:15 that morning inviting me to come meet with the regents and learned of the job around 2 a.m. So some 6 hours, 7 hours later, I was back at OU, and the conversation, one of those was with the Faculty Senate exec, and to Joshua and Amy and Megan and all the Faculty Senate exec, thank you for being such a good colleague, asking probing questions, and I jumped at the opportunity to be here. So how do I look at OU and where we're going? I look at it through an interesting lens. I walked over here with Kyle Harper, and I was an undergraduate here, and I've not walked through the physical sciences breezeway on the bottom floor since I was in Physics 2 or Organic 2. And I walked through here on the way to this, and it just gave me that feeling that you have when you're at a research university. And it reminded me of the past. And I thought about, you heard the bio of me, and you've probably heard some aspect of that before, but really what makes me so excited about our mission is the fact that I'm a direct beneficiary of it, not just as a student, having been here, and not just as an employee, having a chance to teach here, but my father was a first-generation student here. His father came over here from Lebanon, and he was one of 9 children. He was the youngest of 9. None of the others went past high school. Many didn't go through high school, and they were from a family of very, very modest means, taking turns actually putting kids in an orphanage because they couldn't afford to keep all of them fed during times. And all of them together helped out. My father is the only one of the 9 to go to college, and he went here to the University of Oklahoma, and he went on from undergraduate on to medical school and built a family and a life and gave me the opportunity I have to be here today. So when I think about this idea of what is a great comprehensive research university, I never leave public out of that. That is at the core of who we are, a great public research institution. I think it's important that we always ground ourselves in that. And as I have been since, the last year and change has been a tough one, in case you didn't notice. When I have gone and begun I've been doing this job for 90 days now, roughly. And each time I get in front of a group and I'll say, a lot of folks have asked me how the job is going, and I'll tell them what could possibly go wrong. It's been a really rough run over the course of the last year. And I don't need to catalog those, but I do think it's worth just covering because of the impact it's had on us individually and collectively. I began to write them down. And, 3 presidents in 18 months, a second racist incident that got national headlines, a donor reporting scandal that then resulted in a U.S. News headline problem for us, a Title IX investigation involving a past president that continues to receive publicity, and a near financial catastrophe. I'll talk more about that in a second. Any one of those 5 would be a lot for a year. We went through 5 of those, and we all walked across campus and talked to individuals that we know that are friends of ours and felt their stress directly, especially on the staff side. We worried with them. They told us their anxieties. We, even those of us that have the benefit of and designation of tenure, still felt anxiety. I didn't feel great at work every day. There was that gnawing anxiety that was beyond palpable. And so I think it's important that before launching into where are we going? It's important to be honest about the state of affairs and how they were coming into this summer. Now, when I've spoken to these groups, what I've done throughout the last 90 days is talk about, I acknowledge the difficulty of the last 12 to 18 months, and you have to, otherwise you're just not honest. I also, though, put it in context. And I think context is always useful. The context here is we're a really good, comprehensive flagship research university. And what we do, and I've chosen the word carefully, is sacred. I mean, think about what we get to do, right? We teach, right? We transmit knowledge to the next generation. We create knowledge, right? We engage in unique human expression. And we serve society. And that's just profound. That's what we do for a living. And so I think it's important that we think about context. We also think about the 129-year history of this university. And yeah, it's been a rough year. But the reality is, context does matter. And I think about what does tomorrow hold? And I tell people, I've told our alumni and friends and students that our best days are ahead of us. And I have a firm belief in that. The next question becomes, okay, how, right? What is it that makes tomorrow's days certainly our best? And that's really the topic for discussion today. What is the state of the university? And broadly, how do we make those days ahead of us our best days? So let's begin with some good news. That's something different. Right, we talked about a few of these. First of all, the first question I was asked when I interviewed that night on, I guess, morning of May 17th was, are we in crisis? And I can count votes. Right, there are 7 regions, and I thought, I think I know what the right answer here is, that we're in financial crisis. That wasn't the answer I gave. I expressed that it was critical we get it right, but that we can get that right with discipline and integrity and all of those things. We can get it right, and we'll talk more about the budget in a bit. But I talked about what the real crisis facing us, which is around diversity and inclusion, and around, more specifically, race and ethnicity. That we have to be able to address that in an honest, clear-eyed way. That we have to understand where that fits in terms of our priorities as an institution, and how we affect that in a way that's meaningful. And that we have to stop. Look, we are a microcosm of society. We're supposed to be better. At times we are, at times we're not. But the things that have happened here, people are like, oh no, what happens if there's another racist incident? Well, there will be one. There already has been one, I'm sure. It's a question of when it catches attention. And the truth of the matter is, it's deeply seated in our culture right now. Right? These divisions are splintering across our society. People of one political affiliation have no idea what the other political affiliation could possibly think, and many times refuse to even countenance it. When we think about one thing all of our students have in common, it's that regardless of their fields, they're going to go out and be leaders. They're going to be our leaders in society. And so when we think about the microcosm we must be, right, transmitting an understanding of diversity, equity, inclusion, those are critical principles we have to transmit for the larger us to have any chance. And so when we think about it, the question isn't, will there be another incident? There will be. We have a lot of people here. And it's a deeply divided culture. I think the key becomes, what are we doing about it in a proactive way? And rather than sitting back and telling people who we are not, right, we're not that latest racist incident, we disagree with that, we're opposed to that, the answer should be, who are we? Right, what do we stand for? So when someone speaks out and says something with which we disagree, everyone hopefully knows where we stand. And there's a roadmap and a thought around how we do that, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But to me, that's the crisis. Now, we've held tuition flat for the last 2 years. I had one of the deans, who might be here today, who asked the question, why for a second year, and can it be raised? Right? Asking really good questions. And let's talk about that. The belief was, though, and the thought and the decision was, let's not raise it for a second year. We can't hold it flat forever. But it's important that we think about our public mission. That's a piece of it that is not priced out. We brought in, the university brought in a record-sized class with a 26 ACT and a 3.62 average GPA. It is the largest class in our history. It's important because with any one of those crises, any one of those could have had a devastating effect on enrollment. And I give it up to Jeff Bolanek and that team, and to all of you. We have one particular dean who might be in the College of Journalism that goes door to door, which is not creepy entirely, but very effective. And so everyone's a part of this. And when you think about what is the state of the university, I think we'd all prefer to have objective indicators rather than me standing up here throwing out platitudes. And I think that's without a doubt a data point that has to be acknowledged. It's a high quality class, it's a record size, and that matters. We had a raise program, 2 for faculty, 1 about to come up, which we'll talk about, and then also the first one in 5 years for staff. That's good news. Research, you've seen the letter that went out recently on research. I'm sure you read every single word of it, because I know I would if I were receiving it. But in there, it was important. It said research expenditures are up. It indicated that new grant contracts are up 20% over last year. Proposals are up 16% over the record year. The relationship with the state is good news. It's gotten better. There was an actual increase in money from the state. This is not broken. We had an actual increase in the state, including a one-time $8.3 million allocation set aside for Norman campus research initiatives. And that's great news. And building that is essential to us. Now, what are the major findings I have over the last, my now deep 90 days of experience in this job? Here are my takeaways. First of all, the $50 million in cuts was necessary. We were in a position where we absolutely would have had a financial problem of a serious magnitude had we not made those cuts. Right? We're not in a crisis right now, but those cuts took place, and it put us in a position where we were able to come forward with a budget that balanced for this year. Now, and there's no, you may have heard, for those that have been around for a long time, you've heard about the hangover that goes into the next year. There's none of that. This is a budget that is clean and comes off in a way that it is balanced. Now, what it doesn't include are a number of categories we need to build to, but it is a balanced budget that came in, and that was important. Now, the problem with being at a break even is you can't deal with a crisis or an opportunity. So we can make payroll and all of those things, and we're in good financial shape in terms of where we are, but we're not in a position where we have extra money where we can deal with a crisis or an opportunity. We have to, if we're going to think about how do we move to the next level, how do we continue our sacred mission and propagate it across time and grow it, we have to be in a position where we can grow resources in a way that drives our mission. And everything we look at when we think about resources, about financial resources, has to be in the first instance, how can we drive those into our academic mission? How do we drive that forward? All right. Joshua has now noted I'm now past the initial 10 minutes I projected. I know, I could feel it from here. The research growth has been impressive. We're going to have more faculty. We can't do it with the number of faculty we have. We can increase productivity, and we will, but we're going to need more faculty. Operations, we had a few we looked at. I mean, you saw where we were with development. We brought in the head of the foundation to come in and help restructure our development operation. It's not currently positioned to go out for a major capital campaign. It will be over the course of the next year. We're going to get there, but it's not there right now. It needed a complete overhaul. And we're looking at every area to make sure that they're aligned with what our mission is. So that was the big takeaway from this. So my big takeaway from this summer is this. I turned to deans and executive officers, and I asked the question pointedly in a room. Tell me what the Norman campus strategy is. I'm going to call on one of you randomly, probably from the back, to answer that question of what is the Norman campus strategy. Now, we know that colleges and departments have clear strategies that have been worked on in a very diligent way, but what is our Norman campus strategy? Nobody could answer the question. And so when I think about why are our better days ahead of us, because if we had a strategy that was articulated, that we could align things like development and other areas behind, that seems like a positive. Right? It doesn't make me the world's greatest college president, but it seems like a basic thing that we should be doing. So what are those things we want to be? Right? What, besides a really good speech, what is it that's going to make us a truly great, comprehensive public research university? What is that strategy? And we can think about a few objective ways to measure it. One of those we talked around, but not about, is looking at the median, right? Look at the median of AAU public institutions. That's a measure. We can break it down and say, how do we measure as against those standards? Now, when you talk about that, you realize that only certain kind of research, right, research expenditures are a part of that. And we're much bigger, there's lots of conversations to have. But if you're going to argue that you're a great university, you have to say, what is it you're chasing? Is it that? Is it maintaining our Carnegie One designation? Is it being the highest quality at the lowest price? Because we're a public institution. And if so, what does that mean in terms of where we price the cost of our education? What's our plan in terms of, what's our 5-year strategy on increasing enrollment or decreasing enrollment for that matter? What student success metrics are we chasing? Faculty research, graduate education, online, each one of those categories. What's the strategy? And so, to me, the most important thing that we can do in terms of making sure we are driving our mission, that sacred mission, is that collectively, and I've issued this challenge for us, and that is that I put down January 17th, it's a Friday. By January 17th, we've gone through a process as a campus, and each of our 3 campuses will be doing this. We are doing this. And that is engage in a process to put together not a complete strategic plan, but a strategic framework that says, here are the things that we value, and here's what we're going to chase. And in the context of all of this, it requires that we're clear-eyed and honest. This isn't a political campaign. What are those things we need to think about? And the answer is, where do we find the resources to do this? If you think about it, our academic mission and our strategy is at the top of this. We want to feed that. Right? To do that in a responsible way, now this is pretty basic, but we haven't had this conversation to my knowledge, and that is, we have to know, you heard a lot last year about building cash. That was really about what's our balance sheet look like. We have to have a healthy balance sheet. We have to be financially stable so we can react to a crisis or an opportunity. We have to also know what deferred maintenance do we have and what does that look like? And we're going to have an answer by December on what that deferred maintenance number is, because we can't exist in crumbling facilities. There's no deferred maintenance. This year we put in $5 million as a guess, probably closer to $10 to $15 million a year to address deferred maintenance. And then, what about Dr. Palmer and ARC? They're getting in more contracts than they can possibly deal with. And they would like to have a new building to expand our radar initiatives. That'd be a positive, wouldn't it? I'm for that. Right? But what is the fourth prong of that? What is our capital strategy? I mean, you can't do this without that comprehensive strategy. And we as a campus, for each of our, need to sit down and have an honest, clear-eyed conversation about that. And there are only so many levers that are out there. Right? Tuition and fees is one. Internal savings is another. State funding is another. Federal funding is another. Fundraising, once where it should be, can be one of those, although those dollars usually aren't discretionary. Online education. We need to be very clear about what is it we're chasing and what's our plan to get there. And it needs to be inclusive but also decisive. In meeting with the Faculty Senate exec, we talked about how do we do that. During the cuts that affected the academic areas over this past year, PAPBAC was developed, and they did a terrific job. And so any additional cuts that are countenanced, which we haven't currently gone through, we'll of course go through a process that involves PAPBAC. And as we think about how we build this strategy together between now and January 17th, so that we know that for which we're aiming, it needs to be inclusive. It'll be led by our deans and the provost. Departmental chairs will be a part of this. Faculty Senate will come in with the PAPBAC 2.0 version. We've talked about Faculty Senate exec being involved in that. Also, faculty, senate, exec had a great idea, which is how do you build a more inclusive environment where ideas can percolate outside of the usual chain? And they said, what about taking departmental chairs from disparate colleges that have common interests and having them get together and be part of this process? And the answer was, it's a great idea. Right? But we have to know what it is we're shooting for. We just can't declare summarily ourselves a great university without being able to demonstrate it. When I look at opportunities, I think about our relationship with the state and federal government. I think about leveraging across colleges like faculty, senate, exec opined on. But I also think about what's happening at a truly comprehensive university. We have 17 miles away this magnificent health sciences center, one of only 4 in the country that has 7 colleges. They did a huge hospital transaction last year. They just received for the Stevenson Cancer Center NCI designation, ranked as one of the top 50, so top 2% in the U.S. in terms of cancer centers. How does that matter for us? How do we leverage that? What's our strategy to leverage having all those opportunities? And we're already doing a lot of these things. I looked at the Stevenson Cancer Center, at the Health Sciences Center, and I figured, I discerned that there are currently 40 Norman campus faculty that have a role in advancing the cancer center's research goals. 40. And they come from, you'd guess, engineering. They come also from anthropology, biology, chemistry, biochemistry, Native American studies, health and exercise sciences, psychology, and communications, right? There are unique opportunities that attach to being a comprehensive research university. But there are macro forces as we look at this. This really is getting towards the end, Joshua. Just hang tight. There are macro forces that we need to be aware of and that have to go into our thinking about what our strategy is. And those macro forces are undeniable, although many in academia are trying to ignore them. One of the best admonitions I received when I came into the dean job 9 years ago, and just so you'll sort of understand it, colleges of law started off at 2x the cost of undergraduates, and over the last 18 years, we've just tacked on those percentage increases, which if you do math at all, means the cost of a legal education is really expensive, even as compared to an undergraduate education. And all of a sudden, so I walked into the job and it was the height of applicants to law schools nationwide, and a colleague came in and said, I want you to know trees don't grow to the sky. And I said, well, that's helpful and true. Great conversation. Well, I understood what that meant soon, because all of a sudden, half of the applicants to law schools nationwide disappeared, roughly half, just shy of that, over the next 3 or 4 years, because the price became too expensive. Half of the applicants left. That isn't supposed to happen in higher education. And we responded by dislodging ourselves from the rest of the university in terms of tuition increases. We held tuition flat for 5 of the next 6 years. The average waivers, net tuition for students went way down. And how do you survive when you're a separate budget unit? The answer was you have to get creative, and you have to realize things that are going on. And we jumped into new areas and new programs. We jumped into online, which had wonderful opportunities and also hazards that attaches to it. We've got to be clear-eyed about what can be in front of us in terms of challenges and also how we're going to address those in a proactive way. All right. We have to realize that disruptive change through technology is affecting every space, including ours. Right? Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, right? The FANG stocks. Look at any industry, disruption has occurred. And we have to have an honest conversation about what that means and how we're going to address it, and it's not going to go away. We have to have a clear-eyed online strategy. I've asked Dean Greg Garn to help drive that strategy. Right? We have to have a vision and a strategy for dealing with that. I know it sounds at times like an existential threat to a certain extent, but it's there. We must deal with it and consider it a huge opportunity. When you think about our mission, right? Disseminating knowledge. It used to be geography with directional schools to try and democratize education. Now, what do we have? Technology, where we can truly democratize education in certain aspects. Now, will it replace completely the in-person experience? No. But we need to be very clear about our strategy for our in-person campus and online. And I appreciate Greg stepping up and helping, and others helping as we think through what that strategy is. Diversity and inclusion. At every place I go, I talk about it, regardless of the audience. It, to me, is the one we have to get right, for all of the reasons we know. How do we accomplish this? And the answer is a lot of committees. A big diversity and inclusion committee came in, did work over 2.5 years, starting I think February of 16. If you haven't seen it yet, please read it. There's a phase 1 and a phase 2 to this plan that is well studied and well done. I wanted to make sure the very first event that I had in Boyd House was an event that focused on diversity and inclusion. And a couple of weeks ago, we opened the doors and brought everyone in to talk about all the colleges and those key people involved. But the reality is we all have to know what the plan is. We actually threw a pop quiz at everybody to make sure they had read the plan. And what have we done in that space? We have elevated the role to a seat at the table, elevated the position to an executive officer level. We've created the ability to actually have some influence over what the college level diversity and inclusion officers are doing by creating an evaluation each year by the head of diversity and inclusion, and Jane has done an incredible job leading this, to make sure that those individuals in the colleges are part of a plan and are evaluated based upon that plan. We had the summit we talked about. We've added 1 position now. We added 5 positions in the Title IX office that also have an educational component to it. We've created additional space for diversity and inclusion. And I made the commitment, and I'll be on the Health Sciences Center campus tomorrow doing this, which is having our summit at the Health Sciences Center tomorrow. I'll also be in Tulsa doing this on diversity and inclusion, talking about how we're going to come back at the end of this semester, over the break in this semesters, and evaluate the outcomes. How are we actually doing? And there'll be good news and there'll be bad news, but it'll be honest news, and we'll talk about it. There are a lot of very good things going on, a lot of positive things for us to think about. We have focused a lot on the negatives. It's time for us to focus on the positives, be honest about how we can improve the negatives that have come out there. Realize that we're doing things other schools aren't doing right now, other universities aren't. Holding tuition flat for 2 years is one of them. We probably can't next year, but hopefully it'll be modest. We have to have pay programs that are regularized. And one of the things that we looked at was, as we go through this strategic framework over the next 3 or 4 months, we can't just sit idle. Now the reality is there's no new money in there as of right now to go out and do exciting new projects. We have to find a way to either generate new money or save money to create staff and faculty salary programs, to go recruit and hire new positions, to do all of the things that drive our mission. But whenever Kyle came to me and we sat down with Ken Rowe and others, the question was, how many positions can we go seeking and searching for this year for the FY21 budget? Now, the most prudent answer would have been, and we know we've cut faculty over the last 4 or 5 years, the most prudent answer to that would have been, if you were just being fiscally tight on this, is how many did you lose last year? And if you want to have a salary program, you believe that's important, why don't you cut a few there? We looked at it and said that can't be the answer. We have to grow our faculty. We have to bet on our faculty together in a logical and thoughtful way if we're going to become a truly great university by standards that we come together and articulate. And so we sat there, we talked about how large of an investment can we make of FY21 dollars for Norman campus. And the answer was 30 new positions, above what we lost. And we're going to go out and aggressively add to the faculty for the first time in years because there's no other way to do this. Now, what does that cost? That costs around $4 million in continuing money starting in FY21. In startup, it's around $3.5 million in startup, depending upon who you land. So we've already spent that money in the FY21 budget. And I think we have to because it's an investment. And I think that to wait until we had a strategic game plan put together would have been folly. It would have cost us too much. But we've already said we're committed to that. Right? So that's where we stand right now. As I look at it, I've had the absolute joy spending the last 90 days going around and talking with people. I loved just being here with you all. I am grateful every single day for what I get to do. I love going home and telling my kids what it is that I do for a living. Right? When they ask what Dad does when he goes to work, when I get to tell them I'm part of something that involves transmitting knowledge, creating knowledge, engaging in human expression, and serving society, I feel pretty good. And I've been around here long enough for the last 23 of the last 25 years, to know how fortunate I am to be among you all. So thank you. I feel like I'm surrounded.
Purely unintentional. All right, let's, again, field questions that were submitted by you to our interim president. Amy, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. One of the most vexing problems within departments is salary compression and inversion, which effectively levies a loyalty tax we pay as hardworking members of the OU faculty, often with strong histories of academic production, impressive teaching evaluations, and much higher service obligations. This situation pushes faculty to go on the market in search of counteroffer from another university as a means of forcing a raise in salary. Will your administration put the salary inversion problem on its priority list, and can you detail what plans you have to address this issue substantively apart from this year's state allocations?
That sounded scripted. Yeah. So this is something that, can you hear me? Yeah. So this is something that at the college level, I mean, it's true for every college. At every college we have faculty that are compressed and inverted, and it's a real problem. I mean, one thing I realized is that we all know as faculty what we signed up for, but we also know what others make, and it feels awful to be compressed. Well, it feels bad to be compressed and awful to be inverted. And so it's a very real problem. I've looked through the past 9 years where it is. And it's interesting. The college I was in is very similar to the faculty as a whole. I looked at the numbers. And if you look at the percentage of faculty that are compressed or inverted, if you look at associate and full professors, 20% of the faculty are compressed or inverted. You know those numbers. When you look at it a bit closer, only 3%, now it's 100% if it's you, but among full professors, that number's 3%. And so who's taking, as a category, the brunt of this? And the answer is associate professors are taking the brunt of this. And part of that is when you look at state funding and you track over time how it impacts individuals that have been here for a long period of time, you see where there were raised programs that were consistent, and you see where there weren't raised programs. And so I think identifying the problem and knowing where it is important. It's a real problem. Now, how do we address it? The answer is you have raises, and that you're hopefully thoughtful about the raises. And when we do raises, we're balancing market forces. Inflation, at least to date, hasn't taken a break. We balance that with merit. We can talk about evaluations as they apply to that. We balance that with equity, both in terms of compression, inversion, gender, ethnicity, and make sure those are all taken into account. Now, how do you satisfy? First of all, have a raise program that's regular, because as I said, inflation doesn't take a break. The second part of that is how is it addressed? You know, what did it look like this year? Right? Just follow the money. So it's 3% effective raise was done in the COMPA study this year, which was formulaic and was built into the formula, which I'm not an expert. An element of compression and inversion, an element. Didn't fully address it. The raise program that's because of the state's additional money that will go into effect October 1 is hybridized. So it's going to be 1% across the board, and then 1.2% given to the chairs, to the deans and chairs for discussion with the chairs and directors, how that 1% should be allocated. And the considerations being put forth are those, which is merit, equity, and those senses. And we're given the data to review it at that level. Now that's 1%. That's not going to fix what is, for associate professors in particular, a decades-long problem of compression and inversion. And so I think that as we hopefully get to the point of being able to afford regular increases in consultation with the faculty senate and more, and certainly with the deans, this idea of how do we address the equity questions, and part of that is we cannot go this long without raises because it exacerbates a problem for those right now that have been here during the middle.
Thank you. If merit raises are tied to annual evaluations, what do you see as the appropriate level of input from departmental faculty in establishing the benchmarks for what's considered excellent in creative and research activity?
Yeah, it's critical. I mean, when we think about so from two perspectives. When we think about shared governance. Spend a lot of time. You work in a college of law, and you learn a lot about shared governance. And think about it a lot. And when you think about shared governance in its clearest form, it's around hiring of colleagues, it's around the curriculum, and it's around evaluation. And so it's essential when we talk about merit and how we judge merit, that's truly representative of the shared governance, where it is the faculty that knows the area, that is strong input into that evaluative process. And so the shorter answer would be it should be strong, it should be clear, and that is at the essence of shared governance, to make sure that the evaluations take place and that the evaluations are based upon measures that represent the appropriate benchmarks for those disciplines.
Thank you. We appreciate your concern for and your acknowledgement about inequities beyond merit that have to do with race, gender, ethnicity. When and how are you going to address pay equity across the lines of race and gender?
Yeah, so it has to be a part of our equity conversation. And it's multi-level in terms of why you would do it, but it's the right thing to do. You have to address it. Right now, the data that we have is good. It's not as clear as we should have it. It needs to be transparent. And then it becomes individual. And so I think that this is something that as we talk to, and certainly as we met with the deans, as Kyle met with the deans, and as I've met with the deans, the data they have and the information they have gives them some of the tools to look into it and address those, but it needs to be programmatic and clear. And it is by group, because you know, to see where's the disparate impact, right, categorically, and then to say, okay, how are we addressing it on an individual basis? But you know, part of the challenges we have is, and we're getting these remedied, but some of the data, as you know, that we have is not that good of data. And one of the implementations we're doing this year is to turn on all the functions of PeopleSoft so we can aggregate data in a better way. So then when we ask the question, when we look at female faculty as against male faculty in these categories, how do they compare? That data is clean data. But some of it you don't need that for. You can see already inequities that are taking place, and the goal is the deans and the chairs identify those on an individual basis, and we have a plan for those.
We've pursued exacting efficiency measures across campus for several years now, but have not heard much about growth strategies for the institution. What's your plan to increase university resources from sources like public support, a capital campaign, private giving, corporate partnerships, research grants, and or seed money for larger opportunities?
Yeah, I had a friend that came up with some really good business advice, and he was like, grow the damn pie, which, look, growing is way better than contracting when it comes to dollars. So let's take those as best I can in turn. How do we grow it? So part of our strategy is, does anyone know our enrollment growth strategy? And I'll include the provost in this. I know what you proposed. It's going to go through a process. Why is it important we have, so this year, our largest class was 3% growth roughly over last year. That expands our mission. It also expands our resources. On a net basis, what does that do for us in terms of adding new resources? It's a massive multiplier. Right? What do retention rates do around that? The answer is, we don't have a good answer right now. What is the average revenue per student? How do our ancillaries really fit into this? Our data is not good. So we're working on that data. It is an absolute top priority. But we have to have a plan that says that we know how much we need to grow so that we, in terms of undergraduate, it's the biggest multiplier we have. And it's great, it aligns our interests. We educate more students, we provide them an OU education, and we can then grow. And so the first answer is look at where the actual opportunities are. And as we work over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, we'll be able to answer with great precision those questions. The answer is likely a 2 to 3% growth strategy. And how do you get there? So when we think about this, the question is, how many resources, like, what do we want to become off of real benchmarks that are objective? And then you reverse engineer into that number. Back of the envelope, if we didn't have an inclusive process, to do that in the next 5 years, what's our number, Kyle, we need in terms of new resources? We're not going to hold you to this, but what do we need in terms of new resources? $100 million a year. Anybody have it? So we, as all of us, right, those that have taken the time out right, on the third day of classes to come and listen to this, need to know, okay, what is this strategic framework? What does it cost to get there? What are the trade-offs? And then how much fuel do we need? What does that number look like? And if the number is 100 million, or 50 million, or 200 million, I've got a lot of numbers in my head, this could go on forever. What is that number and how do we get there? And that's how you then say, okay, what does enrollment growth need to be? And what's our plan for enrollment growth? That's when we go to the state and say to the state, as a partner, not as an island, but as a partner, and our interests are aligned, right? Educating the citizenry, helping disruption doesn't just happen to universities, and it happens to states. Right? What is our role with the state in being an economic engine to help build new industries for Oklahoma? If we can make a pitch to them that tells them what our role is, and I met with a lot of groups. One of those was the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce. And my message to them was, you can't do it without us, and we aren't sufficient. Right? We're an essential component of this, but we're not sufficient in and of ourselves. It's got to work together. So what's our strategy to the state to go after state resources to say, we need an X contribution to get to Y number? Federal level. Our federal strategy has not been sufficient. Our state strategy hasn't been great. Decreases in funding over the last decade. Who's picked it up? Students. And new investments, right? This was the first year we've had them. We have to have a strategy that actually says, here are the resources we need and here's how we acquire them. Fundraising. I've told you we have to rebuild the organization over the course of the next year, but what are our fundraising priorities right now? You don't really know until you know what your strategy is. I know that need-based seems important to be a great public research university. I know research sounds important in that. What are those areas that we've looked at and said through a collaborative process, these are the areas to invest in? So when we think about those levers to pull, state, federal, by the way, there's a lot of money at the federal level. We need to grow this pie. Let's be honest and clear-eyed about what those finite number of opportunities or levers are. And one of those is online. How long will the margins currently there continue in the graduate space? I don't know. But what's our strategy around it? So when we think about, to answer your question, we think about how do we grow the pie versus just cutting. There's a discrete number of options, and until we have a clear-eyed plan around that, there's no way we can become great.
Thanks for especially bringing up the question of need-based scholarships. We'll trust that continues to remain on your radar. Let me ask a off-script follow-up here about potential threats to, say, intellectual property and or the professoriate as a way of conducting educational business in an online model. What do you see as the chief threat to the professoriate in that model, and how do you mitigate it?
I would say poor educational product is the biggest hazard. Taking intellectual property and not allowing for appropriate compensation for that effort. There's a lot of hazards. We can detail probably 30 hazards. I think that as we look at it, though, we have to ask the question, is online something that is going to be sustained? And how does it fit into, after we have the discussion, into our vision for it? And I don't think it's acceptable, certainly in the role that I have, to say there are all these negatives. I don't want to address it. I think that what we have to do together is say, where does technology fit? Is it, what kind of online is it? Is it hybridized? Is it synchronous? Is it asynchronous? What are the elements to that? At what level is it? Is it better at the professional master's level? How does it look for degree completion? What kind of student and profile do you go after? What are the objectives that you have in this? What are the outcomes? How do you measure it? Can we make it better? And then I think it turns on us to then ask the question, there are existential threats to everyone in every industry, and it's largely technology-based. And so I think we have to ask, we know instinctively that the in-person physical campus bricks and mortars is essential to a category of learning. Is it essential for every category of learning? And can we make the case for every class we teach that that class needs to be in person? And if so, why? Right? Learning objectives and outcomes. Measuring these things, right? What does the data tell us? And when I look around and think about the opportunity that exists for us, I mean, we know the early market leaders that came into this, right? The for-profits that came into this. We saw what happened with MOOCs and all of that, where those are. But then you look across the landscape, right, and we see failed efforts, right? One of those happened at a really good school, University of Texas at Austin. They went through an experiment in this space. But then you look at not just the southern New Hampshires, but you look at what UMass is doing, what Purdue is doing, of course, what ASU is doing. They lay out their strategic plan. And then we have to ask, where does that fit for us? And for our physical in-person campus, why is it that we can't be disrupted in a way that truly creates an existential threat? And I think that's the conversation that we need to have, and one that we have to have. And it's a huge opportunity because a lot of places are not having these conversations. It's way easier to not bring this topic up. It's way easier to not challenge ourselves. But I think it's only responsible, especially as academics, to press ourselves.
In recent years, a continual erosion of power and decision-making at department and college level and concentration of power in Evans Hall has not been a shared governance model. How can we support a culture of leadership that incorporates ideas, people, and initiatives from across the university, and not only from the most powerful and profitable sectors?
That's a leading question. So let's answer it a couple of ways. First of all, I've said it before, when I think about shared governance in an academic model, I'm always fascinated by deans that come in, and you have the, especially non-traditional deans, right? Come in, there's this question of, often see that there's a confusion over what is an executive function and what is a legislative function. And we have some examples of that. And so, being around a university in a leadership position for a really long time, if you don't know how that works, it will eat you up because that's not how a university functions. I think as we acknowledge the importance of it, we need to also be clear categorically. How do we categorize this, and then how does it work together? When I think about shared governance in an academic enterprise, true shared governance to me focuses on 3 areas in its most important instances. And that is around curriculum, right? Unique expertise and values poured into that by the academics that are a part of that community. So it's curriculum, it's selection of colleagues, and the process you go through to select people in those categories, and it's evaluation. To me, those are the cornerstones of shared governance. The next category is, what are those areas that are consultative, where you better bring folks into this conversation if you actually want to move the enterprise forward. And for me, that's a strategic framework. Yes, a few of the deans and the VPs could go off and put together a strategic framework, but if we summarily announce it and there's no process that attaches to that, it will not be executed. And so that to me is consultative, where you better get it right. Then there are those that are sort of strictly administrative, but if academics want to talk about it, you better talk about it. And that is how the grass looks, how the flowers look. that isn't in category 1, it's not in category 2, but if the faculty senate exec or a college wants to talk about, let's talk about the flowers and the grass and all the flora and fauna, sort of a broad category. I might just sort of detail those to take up the next 20 minutes, then we're done. So when I think about how do we operate through shared governance, I think that we have to realize there is the role of the faculty in shared governance, those traditional mechanisms. There is work with faculty senate exec on Norman campus, especially. HSC is a little bit different in terms of how their culture works. And it's being able to look you all in the faculty senate exec in the eye each month when I come in and talk about what those things are that are priorities and engage in that consultative discussion. Then there is at the college level, how do you bring up the ideas? Some should function under the current structure where the deans work with department chairs, and those conversations happen through faculty meetings. I do agree. I thought our last meeting, a particular takeaway was can you create more shared governance in its broader sense by taking department chairs and department heads that are in different colleges and having them work together in topic areas. This has worked beautifully. When you look at the Health Sciences Center, the biggest thing they've done to break down the traditional silos is creating the Stevenson Cancer Center. And they have the Harold Ham Diabetes Center, working around a disease state. And that then breaks down those barriers and creates more and a better flow of information. They're now looking at the gerosciences. There, certainly pediatrics is an area of excellence in terms of how we handle it. So when we think about how do we engage in specific shared governance and traditional definition, and how do we aggregate the best ideas in a way that involves decision making, because you have to have decisions, but decision making that allow for organic ideas to have life. I think it's that more complicated and obviously longer answer.
It is complicated for sure. Particularly related to cuts and potential eliminations. What objective measures will you employ, and what processes specifically of shared governance will you engage to ensure that all relevant stakeholders are heard and understood?
Yeah, so for academic affairs, Pat back, as long as you'll allow it to stay there, is to me a fixture. Having the ability to have a group, and I'm telling you they were, and believe me, I was the one in front of them last year as a dean. But having the deans work through their processes with the departments, bring it up, having it analyzed at the provost level, and then having the academic security blanket around it with Pat back, to me, was a thoughtful process that still allowed for decision making and hard decisions. And here's the thing. We're going to have to make more decisions that are difficult. I mean, we're not in financial crisis, but if we're going to put together a plan that requires resources to drive our academic mission that sound like 10, 20, 40, 50, $100 million a year, we have a finite number of levers. And so the last thing I ever want to do is just engage in something that placates a discussion and then leave and all of a sudden you see something. I'm going to work with faculty senate exec. I'm going to work with the staff senate exec. Work, of course, with the deans and the provost. Pat back will be a part of that. But I want to be very clear that we have, if we're going to accomplish what I know we can, there are going to be more areas we have to analyze and look for efficiencies. We're going to do it based upon data. So to get back to your question, Pat back remains in place, and I'll always be there to talk with the faculty senate exec.
We appreciate also your earlier comments about context does matter, and we thank you not only for Pat back, but also your continued attention to the stakeholders that could come through the context that maybe wouldn't originate in Pat back.
No, absolutely.
We're going to enter the lightning round.
Okay. That was not so subtle. Yes, I'll be brief. You can put me on a clock. That'd be good.
I think this is an important question, so I want to leap ahead a little in the order and get to it. Over the past year, we saw severe cuts to staff and lost many more to attrition. which has led to direct increases in faculty labor for administrative matters and decreases for time available for research and creative activity. To say nothing of the burdens on staff who have had to take on responsibilities formerly handled by many more people. Can you commit to returning academic units to appropriate levels of staffing, particularly for administrative and financial support?
Yeah, we're going to have to grow. I mean, the truth of the matter is we've asked a lot of everyone. I mean, everyone in this room has felt the stress. I mean, I guarantee if I sat down with each and every person here, you're going to say you felt the emotional stress of others and the stress on yourself in your role as well. I know in speaking with my faculty, those previously my faculty now, I still consider these colleagues, because we're all colleagues now. When I think about the most common conversation I had as dean were really talented colleagues walking in and saying, I'm stressed out. And I hate the travel process. Right? And then we had all the staff changes, and that takes away resources from your time. And then we talk about increasing research output in its various forms. And I mean, the numbers don't lie. It's gone up. And we do all of that, and the answer is, hey, congratulations for doing more research. We're going to now take away the talent that you have to help support you. And the strain is real. So that leads to the question. This is not a lightning round way I'm handling it. You asked it in a lightning round way. I'm not answering the lightning round way. It's real. And to keep ourselves honest, we have to grow. We cannot cut our way to prosperity. We can't. We have to be efficient. We have to look for efficiencies. And we have to be realistic about what is our mission and what is not. We have to. But when it comes to providing the faculty support they need to grow to exist in their job, to grow in our jobs, we have to look at teaching loads. We have to look at staff support. We have to look at what we can afford. And then we have to grow. There's not an easy answer to this. And we have to look at benchmarks to help us really say, right, like objectively, our staff to faculty ratio in these areas is not going to work for these reasons. And here's an objective way of looking at it. So it's like a lot of things. The answer is more complicated. The emotional impact, the physical impact is real. And if we're going to accomplish these ambitions, it's not just a matter of providing. We're not going to cut our way there. We have to make sure that we grow the faculty and staff in a way that is through one lens, and that is what drives our academic mission. And I'll have people that will come up and say, tell me you're not going to make cuts in X area. And if it's an area that is not in our academic mission, that isn't related to our academic mission, and it's not serving it in a clear-eyed way, I can't make that promise. Because every dollar that we can pull together that can go into our academic mission, into faculty resources, new faculty, staff to support our faculty directly in what the faculty is doing. If we can't tie it to our mission and our strategy, then I can't look anyone in the eyes and make that comment. And I think that for us to be honest about where we want to go and how we're going to get there, that's how we have to approach it.
Across campus, graduate research and teaching assistants are deeply underpaid. Stipend rates and accompanying student fees make compensation low enough that we are unable to recruit our top candidates. What plans do you have to address these issues?
Keep Randy Hughes around. That probably is too fast. So in FY17, we were at 63% of our target, right, for graduate TA stipends. That's just not acceptable. There's no way we can grow a research mission by being at 63% of peers. That's just a period after that. And so through Randy's leadership and others, certainly Kyle and others, and the deans and all of you, investments were made. And I'm not going to go through all the details of that. We can elaborate that, and that will give Randy and Mike But there have been, we've capped some expenses, we've had a pool of money, we've looked at how we handle our grants and contracts that we pass up, all those areas. We've risen over the last couple of years to 68%, is that right? 68%-ish? And the goal is over the next 3 years, maybe 4 to 5, but a clear plan is part of our strategy to get ourselves within peers. Because we can't be a research university and pay the stipends we've been paying. And so there has to be a clear strategy. What is that strategy? I don't know right now. We're going to all know it by January 17th.
In contrast to the previous and current perception of cronyism, what are some of the ways that you will ensure that university administrators commit to holding open searches to fill leadership positions using transparent hiring practices?
Yeah, follow the policies.
That is learning.
Yeah, I mean, and look, we have a lot of open searches right now, and they need to be filled. And people that are populating, I mean, how many college dean searches are open right now?
I mean, there's 3 searches and there's 4 other items.
Okay. You know, I've already heard from, remember the faculty asked to be on the College of Engineering Dean Search Committee. You know, is it going to be a real search? Is that a good use of my time? It wasn't directly to me, but I would have heard it 3 months ago from a colleague or a friend. And so, you know, we have to be able to look people in the eye that are spending their time on these search committees and tell them that it is a real search and we're going to be doing a true national search. And it needs to be from a diverse pool of candidates. And we need to make sure that that's where we can actually affect diversity too, is by creating pools where we reach out and try to attract top people. And just being inward looking and is not, there are great candidates internally, but this question was born from a disproportionate amount of that. And people on search committees that simply knew they were wasting their time, or didn't know until afterwards, then realized they were wasting their time. And if we're going to have people really engaging in the difficult service, which it is of searches, they have to know it's for real. And we have enough open searches right now that, you know, I guarantee I can look the person in the eye for engineering and say it will be a true national level search. And for each of those searches, I'm happy to, you know, certify that.
We have another question related to transparency. Several campus programs like the REFRA process, the Shared Business Service Center, various trainings and community engagement, along with several administrative positions, seem to carry on without transparency, formal, uniform, or sometimes even any evaluation process. Can you speak to plans you may have to institute comprehensive accountability measures for programs and positions such as those?
Sure. Globally, have a strategy. I mean, have a campus strategy so you know if you've achieved it or not. Seems like a really good first step. The other is that, so let's talk about shared services. In concept, it's a terrific idea. But in practice, it has to actually be effective. And it's growing quickly. And we have to, if we're going to have, let's just say, shared services, a shared services model, there have to be performance measures that are objective, where we can then say they're performing or not performing. And those absolutely exist. They haven't been incorporated yet. We need to incorporate them so that we're engaging in faculty service, helping our folks drive on the administrative area that we can measure, and that they're performance measures. And so I think we have to institute actual performance measures for which there's accountability. And they need to be born, these ideas, when we talk about, I know part of the conversation was, you know, this was picked up as a priority out of this particular office. Where did that come from? That's because there's no articulated top-level strategy. Each one of you is in a college or department that has a strategy. Campus needs one. And that would allow us to then say, things are priorities. Does it matter what our engagement is with the community? Right? If so, why? And why is that worth funding? And then how do we measure whether or not it was successful in and around community engagement, as an example?
Back to the question of diversity. You've initiated a change in the reporting structure and the name for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. What do you see as appropriate funding and staffing levels for these 3 campus offices? And then as a quick follow-up, please identify one short-term outcome that is distinct from an output or a thing done, but an outcome that can be accomplished in the coming year on the Norman campus.
Okay. So let's start with can you name one outcome? The answer is no, I can name 7. It's because the diversity and inclusion plan that was put together has 5 goals and 7 outcomes that are to be measured. And if you haven't had a chance to read through this, and I know that faculty, senate, exec took on a leadership role in making sure we got to this point, so I know y'all are well aware of it. But the very first page of the executive summary of it lays out the 5 goals and the 7 outcomes specifically. And we're going to measure those. And we're going to get that same group that was together in Boyd House a couple of weeks ago during the 2 breaks and look at each one of those 7 outcomes and ask the question, have we achieved those? And the answer is going to be some and probably not others. But we'll at least be able, in a very clear way, to be able to know where we are and see if our plans are working or not. So in reverse order, going back to the first part of your question, is there enough staffing? I went to Jane Arungu, and is she here? And she's probably working. She works tirelessly. And I asked her, what should the structure be? And she came to me to your question and said, here are 4 boxes, each representing a person, including 2 administrative people on 3 campuses that are a diversity and inclusion office that I am in control of. I mean, to your question, that's absurd. Like, there's no way you can make that work. And when I came in, it was an associate VP level. And the very first thing I did first day was I was totally, I had about 2 hours sleep in me, and I was like, God, what can I do? He was like, on your first day, name that position, move the position from an associate VP to an executive officer. And we did that. But that's not good enough. You have to have a plan. We've got a plan now with a phase 1 and a phase 2 that's articulated. That's good. We moved the position up. We then asked, is the structure right underneath it? The answer was absolutely not. Each college had generally a staff person, some faculty, but they were the campus or college diversity officer. Well, that college diversity officer probably had other duties in most colleges. Some it doesn't, others it does. No uniformity. And who was evaluating that person? Well, it wasn't the chief diversity officer. And so he made sure that person was also being evaluated, which then it created, by the vice executive officer of diversity and inclusion. So that then gives some real teeth to how do you actually enforce and measure and execute on your diversity and inclusion plan that's a good plan. And then how do you make sure more voices are heard on this plan? Not just those 4 committees spend a lot of time on it, but how do you take those 4 committees and make sure that it's amplified? And so we had that first summit. We're reaching out to others to make sure we have more ideas that come into that phase 1 and phase 2 plan. I asked Jane how many more people she needed. She said, in addition to having the ability to be attached to these groups and evaluate them, I need to have, for sure, 1 more full leadership position. And then let me get back to you, but I also need new space because we're not together. So we got new space for them. Our Title IX office needed 5 new people. We had 5 new people there. The Gender and Equality Center had an ad there too, and that obviously feeds into how we execute on diversity and inclusion. So this is top of mind. If we don't get this right, nothing else matters. It doesn't. And so we have to get this piece right, and it has to be top of mind every time. Jane comes to those meetings, and we have conversations, and it's a checkpoint every single Monday. And we have to also be clear about how we do this. It cannot just be it has to be at the faculty level and staff level of leadership within the colleges. It has to be infused into our culture and what we do. It can't be a box you check or a report you send in. It's bigger than that. All of us that work around diversity and inclusion, think about equity, know that it has to be cultural. And we have to have a campus climate survey. We're going to have one of those over the course of the next year. We're working our way towards what that climate survey is, but you have to have a climate survey that you can find out what really is going on and be able to measure that as against time. So those are resources that, if you look at the plan, one of the phase 2 elements, we've jumped to a couple of those. We've taken care of a couple of the phase 1s. Some of the phase 1s aren't done yet. Some of the phase 2 have been done, others haven't. But it's a good plan that we can add to. But it can't be a document that gathers dust. It's not lightning round.
This one might be. In light of the recent big Purdue Pharma settlement, which allowed our rival state institution to pocket $200 million while we received nothing, what policies or procedures is the university going to put in place to ensure that we don't continue to miss out on research opportunities? What initiatives will the university pursue, and how will the university ensure it remains nimble and agile enough to pursue growth opportunities outside of any thematic area mentioned in the strategic plan?
This is an excellent question. The others weren't. Just kidding. They were all excellent questions. This one really, to me, begins to crystallize where we have to have our head. Right? What other opportunities are out there that we can go after that we're not presently pursuing? I wasn't in this chair, not this physical chair, or the position of interim president when the $200 million piece came down. I lost sleep that night. When you look at what our College of Medicine, the Health Sciences Center writ large, right? Certainly the Norman campus. When you look at what's being done in and around opioids and addiction at our Health Sciences Center, it is without a doubt the place in the state you go to make sure that we look at what they call from bench to bedside. Like this idea of how do you develop the basic science around addiction, how do you then look for those interdisciplinary cures, and then how do you take that to the training of the physicians and other healthcare providers and make sure that those that need the help receive it, the actual provision of healthcare. There's no question, I will challenge anyone on this, that we're the best in the state at this, bar none, not even close. And at healthcare delivery, we just got ranked #1 in the Oklahoma City Metro in a very competitive environment in terms of the provision of healthcare, let alone the research that goes behind it. We've got a $200 million settlement by Purdue, and we just found out this afternoon that Judge Balkman is going to be announcing the judgment of the court on Monday with the remaining opioid litigants. So there'll be a new judgment there. So stay tuned for Monday at 3 as a cliffhanger. And what's the plan around that if there's an opportunity? We are the place to be doing this work. And you saw at the Cancer Center how Norman campus obviously is a part of the Cancer Center and how it works. Right? 17 miles don't separate what we do, although occasionally it does, but not always. So where were we? Right? How did we miss that? And what other opportunities are out there that look like a $200 million opportunity? The answer is you better have a state and federal strategy. And you better not be arrogant. If we think we're an island, we are absolutely dead wrong. If we think they should come to us with ideas and proposals, we're dead wrong. They won't. And so we have to be a part of our communities. We have to be a part of the governmental systems. We've got to have a plan that is being executed at the state level where we're a presence, where they know what we have to offer and we're at the table. We weren't at the table. We weren't. And when we think about how we serve our faculty, how we create more opportunities for our faculty to drive our mission, we better be out there scouring the landscape at the state and federal level and the private area, to your question, to be able to say, here's what we're seeing. Not to infringe upon someone's academic freedom, that always rests with a member of the faculty, but to create opportunities. That's not the area of expertise that very many people went into. I mean, check your own federal relations or state relations lobbying background. It's not a usual skill to have since you're a subject matter expert. We need to have a federal strategy, a state strategy. We better be looking at and mining opportunities. And let's realize there are some folks here who know how to do it very well. Right? And so let's make sure that those folks do it well and get the support they need. And if we're going to expand from weather radar, as an example, let's just pick on him because he's here. If we're going to expand from that into defense sector radar, if we're going to expand into weather, into beyond weather, into radar writ large, if we're going to realize what we can do in the air area, in the space area, if we look at all these areas that exist, we better be able to mine for opportunities and not just react to individual successes, but be a part of the team that builds a success around a coherent strategy that is, in times, has to be adjustable based upon what's there. I think that what we're looking at in terms of quantum physics is a good example. I made a round to D.C. and met with every member of the delegation in D.C. And we have two different members, one in the Senate, one in the House, two House members in particular, that are very influential on the Science Committee. And both of them looked at us and said, I see you guys are picking up on the opportunity around quantum technologies. And all of them told me the same thing, which is, why don't y'all call on us more and make us part of the strategy? I mean, Tom Cole, here from Norman, is one of the great political, whatever you think of his politics, he is one of the great strategists out there. And we don't go to him nearly enough and say, here's our federal strategy, why won't you help us? Because we need one.
Let me ask a kind of a you pickle here that is still, frankly, very much around the question of growing the pie. But these are a couple of the items that were on the questions that came to us from faculty that are of concern to them. These have to do with ways to improve the status of teaching faculty at the university, particularly the full-time renewable term faculty, who are well qualified, committed to their profession, and yet have few opportunities for raises or for promotion. There are concerns around the degree of funding for the Research Council, in particular support for research in the humanities with the elimination of CRPDE, and possibilities perhaps for growing that pie through relationships with Oklahoma's tribal nations. Any of these stand out to you as places where we might have specific strategies that are already kind of burgeoning in your mind?
Yeah, and I'll be sensitive to time. All of these deserve their own conversation. I'll just hit it in this top line way. On the Native American side, we are blessed with this amazing number of tribal nations here and opportunities, and we have to maximize those relationships. It's at the core of who we are. It's an area of excellence. It's a matter of our identity. And so there's huge opportunities, huge need, and we need to be engaged in that, and not just with the couple of big tribes, but across, is it 77 tribal entities in the state? I was off by a few. No, very off. I was thinking of counties. 77 counties, 39 tribal entities. That's exactly right. But we need to be engaged with a huge opportunity there. We think about the renewable term faculty, and we think about teaching faculty. This needs to be a conversation that is born out of what our strategy is. We know we all have our various positions on turf that exists on this and our own views. We know what those arguments look and sound like. We've all been together through these conversations. I think part of it is to say, okay, what's our strategy, and how does the designation of faculty fit within that, where we can maintain the standards that we want. Much bigger conversation. I know that Faculty Senate Exec has asked to have that conversation before, and it's one we need to continue to have as we think about how we handle the teaching load. We also need to think about teaching loads for our research faculty, and are those loads realistic for what we want to try and accomplish? And when there is, what are our benchmarks, and who are we competing against? I know from just being in one college that we couldn't be competitive. You can tell Kathleen left; she'd had enough of that, right? Dean Guzman's like, I listened to him for 9 years, but when we think about what our expectations are of faculty, we have to make sure that we're allocating resources the right way, and the teaching loads are appropriate.
All right, I think we are near the end of our time. Let me thank you, President Harroz, for your good humor, for your patience with us, for your forthrightness, and especially for your willingness to engage us in conversation. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you next time.